access to television, radio, the internet, it means that once war and conflict is ongoing somewhere in the world, it reverberates, it reaches to people across the world. So every time there is war, there is disaster, there is conflict in a part of Africa, we feel it in this part of Africa. If it happens, outside Africa, we also have this sense of apprehension and worry. Because don't be surprised, there are people who are of Nigerian origin, but are resident in some of these places where these conflicts are happening. So for Sudan, for example, there's a lot of Hausa community in Sudan. So what you get to know is that people in Nigeria, firsthand can feel the impact of some of this ongoing war. Again, we have a similar situation in in Ukraine and Russia, where you have two parties warring and refusing to agree on the modalities for fixing all of these issues in contention. So essentially, conflicts will continue to happen, but we cannot rule out the possibilities that such conflicts will be resolved. But in resolving these conflicts, the middle ground is what is most important, where both parties are able to, sheath their swords, consider, the better good of humanity and their immediate community, such that the issues in contention can be resolved in some way, or can be set aside until when resolution comes, sometimes from a third party. Sometimes you have two people warring, but it takes a third party to be able to see it from a dispassionate perspective and offer ideas and solutions. So yes, we don't know, we cannot say why conflict continues to escalate at this moment, but you see, there are lots of people who profit here from war and conflict, people who will need to supply this side of the war or that side of the war, people who will need to make money from the conflict and the disagreement, people who feel that while the conflict is going on, there can be a lot of plunder and stealing that can happen. So sometimes there's even no reason for fighting, but some people can, pet from behind, ensure that brothers take up arms against themselves. And while they are doing that, they are too busy to know that theft is ongoing in their backyard.
Absolutely, and I will be coming back to unpack some of those points which you earlier on mentioned. Back to you, Prof. You cited earlier on that there is place for dialogue and there needs to be a common ground when trying to, avoid conflict. And your co-panelists were saying that we have this escalation when two parties are unable to come to a compromise. Now, you earlier mentioned that conflicts sometimes could turn into armed conflicts. And with these, we have seen the increase of weapons. Let's look at the Middle East. If we have these crises escalating, it's because, one party still continue to get arms. I think that is equally the case with Africa, because either one party is getting arms from God knows where. And now, with this increase in the supply of weapons during conflicts, could we say that these are one of the factors at the heart of generating conflicts that are plaguing not just the African continent, but the global stage?
That's the truth behind it. Like I mentioned earlier, I'll repeat it again. There are benefactors behind every conflict.
Sure.
And I'll say this. When there is a war somewhere, we have war merchants. They use wars to make money. Why do you think every day they create arms? They create different kind of arms. They do. Don't they know those things are harmful to humanity? So why do they create them? They create them because they know very well that they need money. And so war merchants, in one way or the other, can instigate a war between two different conflicting parties for the purpose of them to be able to sell. Mm-hmm. Let's take, for example, I want to use Cameroon like a case study. The Northwest and Southwest region, for the past years, we never knew anything about arms. It is true that our people, especially from the Northwest region, are versed with creating den guns. Mm-hmm. But their den guns are meant for hunting. They were meant for hunting, as well as cultural displays. But recently, we realized that young people were having Kalashnikov. Question, where were these Kalashnikov created? Was it still in the Northwest and Southwest? No, they came in from somewhere. Who sold these arms to these people? Who gave it to them? Are you sure the person was not behind the instigation of this particular crisis? You realize that the primary suspects or benefactors of conflicts around the globe are those who basically, in fact, they directly benefit from it. Let me put it that way. Let's say, for example, look at what is happening in Russia, Ukraine today.
The Democratic Republic of Congo.
Who is producing the arms? Every day America is saying that we are going to give you more arms. Ukraine is no country that can stand in front of Russia if they actually engage their full force. The United States knows it very well. Major powers in Europe know that very well. But why are they behind pushing Ukraine to keep on?
The same case with the Middle East.
Yes. Why do they keep doing that? They are benefiting from it. The instability in East Europe benefits the US as well as their Western allies.
That's very interesting.
So, if they can possibly, if they can possibly win the hearts of the people and tell them, no, keep on fighting, you have the arms that can be able to sustain you. In fact, why? Where are they taking the arms from?
We ask the same question even in the Democratic Republic of Congo, because you don't know where the rebels or the M23 are getting these weapons
you
for.
See?
Yet you have mines that keep mining every day.
Good.
And then these minerals are being exported to different parts of the world.
Like my co-panelist said something. If you look at it very well, wars have different reasons. For example, the conflict in DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, is existing because of the mineral resources that you see in that particular nation. Why they engage you in fighting, destabilizing you people? They take advantage from behind to
enrich themselves.
And so they are practically stealing in the midst of you fighting. The same thing. I want to look at what happened in Ethiopia. Who was it benefiting when the Ethiopians rose up against themselves to fight? The United States and some Western allies come across the entire Africa. Who are those benefiting when Africans are fighting against themselves? The individuals who claim to be the allies of Africans, those who claim to be giving aid to Africa. They are practically not giving any aid to Africa, but they are using an opportunity to engage you so that they can get what you have. You know, when they come in to negotiate, they come in now sitting like the righteous ones on the high horse. They tell you, okay, let this go and then we'll give you this, so that they make you believe that they have to give you something. We want to rebuild your nation after they have destroyed it. For example, look at Libya.
Yeah.
Libya was one of the best African nations when it comes to infrastructure. Libya was, when it comes to governance and distribution of natural resources as well as the produce, or let me say the finances that came out of the oil that was being sold, the entire population were benefiting from it. But what happened? They looked at Gaddafi and called him a dictator. The people of Libya did not call him a dictator. Westerners called him a dictator. Question: was he ruling over or leading the Westerners or Africans? They gave him that tag. Like it is said in Africa, if you want to kill a dog, you need to tag it with a name. Say this dog is a thief, it stole, so we need to kill it. And yes, you can stone it because it stole. And so when they gave him a tag, they came in and killed him. After that, what happened? The money from the oil directly became theirs. They had killed the man, the strong man who was standing and protecting.
And up to date, the country is yet to recover.
It is going to take a lot of time.
Sure.
That is just one case. There are many other nations across the globe that have suffered from different conflicts, not because they were actually supposed to suffer from those conflicts, but simply because those who instigated it wanted to benefit from it. We might not be calling names, but I'll be sincere in saying this. The Westerners have different strategies to keep you in perpetual conflict so that what belongs to you can end up in their accounts, can end up benefiting them. So for a long period of time, you see, African leaders sat the last time and said, okay, let us put an end to arms in Africa. And they came up with a slogan, and that was 2020.
Yeah, but now it has been pushed to 2030.
Yes, 2020, they still push it.
Silencing the guns.
Silencing the guns in Africa. Now they have pushed it because it was not a reality. So the question is, now that they tried silencing the guns and the guns were not silenced, what caused the guns from not being silenced? They did not stop. They were supposed to go and stop the manufacturer, not the person who is buying the arms. Because the promises you receive before you buy the arms, if you can buy this amount of arms, and then maybe will come and give you arms for free, so that you fight and win, then after that we are going to receive this from you. They know what you have. They know what you have. They have satellites in the sky that monitor your land. In fact, know everything that you have. So when they tell you there's this piece of land over there, when we give you these arms and you successfully overcome, then we are going to take over and we will own that piece of land. Look at what happened in Mali. The northern part of Mali had a conflict where rebels took it over. And the French came in, making us to believe they came to eradicate the rebels. But for the past 14 years that the French were in Mali, they were unable to kind of push the rebels away. But what happened? Even the Malian soldiers did not have the right to go up the north. It was the duty of the French. And yet, nothing happened. And when they were leaving, the Malian government does not have the right to search anything what they carry. And so what was that? They actually used the opportunity to get the gold mines that were there, and actually should I use the word, they were stealing the gold. And at the end of the day, when the people realized that they were actually not being helped, they're being exploited, they rose up and said, we don't want Mali again. The same thing happened in Niger. Niger is a nation rich in uranium.
Yes.
But they lack electricity. The French do not have uranium, but they power their industries with uranium coming from Niger. Who was benefiting from these issues, from these raw materials, or this uranium? The French were benefiting from uranium that was leaving Niger or Africa more than the Africans who have it. Is that normal? No. And so at the end of the day, they need to create different situations to keep you underground so that you remain the underdog and they keep on swindling what belongs to you. And as a result of that, the Nigerians got up and said, no, we don't want this anymore. We don't want this. We need France out of our country. It started like a joke, but it happened. And this instigated a conflict where the soldiers had to create what we call a coup d'etat to take over power so as to execute the desires of the people. And so you see where a conflict came from. Swindlers actually taking away what belongs to a people to develop their nations with it. And at the same time, telling the world that Niger is the poorest nation in the world.
But as of now, if you really look, you see that the country's gross domestic product has actually changed.
It changes.
As compared to how the economic outlook was before.
Why did it change? Because the same uranium that France was taking for nothing is being sold now to another. And the benefit is being seen in the nation, in the economy. And so it is important that we realize something. I am not an anti, there's some people who hear me talk, they'll say maybe I'm anti France, I'm anti-American. No. I am not against the Westerners. I will never be against the Westerner. But my problem is the different policies they use in kind of manipulating the globe so that they remain on top while others remain below. It's what I don't think I like. That's why I might not be a fan of Russia. I might not be a fan of the BRICS. But the idea they came up with about the multipolar nation economic strategy, where every different blocks can exist to balance the war economically, it was a powerful one. As compared to the unipolar idea of the Westerners who says that we are the ones who control the economy of the world. I don't think a group of people should control the economy of the world, and they are the ones who create these conflicts. So that the moment they see you struggling to emerge, they need to come up. You see, our brother, my fellow panelist is a Nigerian. In 2014, I remember Nigeria had one of the best economy in Africa. It is true to today they say they have the first, they are the first economy in Africa. But the way it was growing, from nowhere, Boko Haram came. Boko Haram came from nowhere. Who brought Boko Haram? What was the purpose of Boko Haram? And I discover Boko Haram only came at a period when the nation was getting stable.
Yes.
And destabilized everything. Where is Boko Haram taking arms from? Where are they taking money? Who is their sponsor? If you have to go dig behind, you realize that those who are behind are the same people who want to control the economy of the world, who want to be at the head of the economy of the world.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor AKUHMBOM. And now moving forward with your co-panelists, SHITTU. Now you listened to Professor AKUHMBOM and the points he brought forth, and he was talking about the African Union, silencing the guns agenda, which is due for 2030. I'll go down the line. Now we have these weapons that are so much fueled on the global world, or it's better still across the globe, and as a result, degenerating some of these conflicts. Now, with these, do you believe that an arms embargo could go a long way in addressing this sad problem?
Yeah, definitely. Beyond embargoes on arms, there has to be leadership direction. Because most times what you have are leaders who are more subservient to either Western or Eastern, will I say godfathers or controllers? Because somehow, without having an independent thought mindset, without having a unique thought mindset, there's an assumption that whatever it is that Bretton Woods and Western nations or Eastern nations tell us is what we should do. Do we tell them how to run their economy? Do we tell them how to run their political landscape? We don't interfere with their activities, but they do with ours. So what we can say beyond, ratifying conventions, beyond, arms embargoes and all that, we must understand that there's a place for knowledge transfer. Why should some nations have certain knowledge about arms production while other nations should not have such knowledge? Why should some have access to nuclear, weapons, and other nations do not have access to nuclear weapons? But in essence, Africa must learn to live beyond the machinations of those who continue to propel this conflict. DRC, for example, has no reason to be unstable up to this moment. But the profiteers of war who continue to bleed Democratic Republic of Congo from both sides are making a lot of money. They are making a lot of money because they are able to move mineral resources from that country and repurpose it elsewhere. Those who are profiting from such trade are the promoters of this conflict. Again, we take Libya, which was mentioned by my co-panelists. Libya, at the time of that conflict, the oil and gas supply of Libya was being stolen by those who supposedly are trying to bring about democracy to the country. Why do you have to upset a system that worked for the people and replace it with a chaotic, kind of, government? The idea is to force democracy on people. If democracy is about the will of the people, then it means that there is no way you can force a will on people. You leave it to them, you let them understand that this is good for you, but leave it to them as a thing of choice, electoral choice. So, okay, this is what the direction we want to move into. However, we're not seeing that. So what I am sure is that until we're able to degrade conflict, until we're able to deal with conflict situations across the world, the sheer amount of human suffering, needless amount of human suffering, across the world will not see a slowdown. It will continue to worsen. People will continue to suffer from lack of water. People will continue to suffer from lack of access to, basic human development access. People will continue to suffer from their inability to generate wealth or pass wealth from generation to generation. So there's a lot that we must do to sustain peace in the world by stopping conflict in whatever sphere, in whatever direction that we can for the betterment of humanity.
And indeed, there is a need for collective efforts. And now, stay with you, Shittu. You are citing that there are underlying issues that are fueling these conflicts around the globe. Now, how does these weapons, because if we have spiraling conflicts across the globe at this particular point in time, it's because we still have weapons that are reaching the masses to fuel the conflict so it doesn't come to an end. So how does these weapons get, because yes, in as much as we acknowledge the fact that there might be others benefiting from this conflict, how are the policies involved in the respective countries, making it so easy that those that are in the countries cannot monitor the entry of arms into their nations?
Thank you. So a lot of what is happening across a lot of African countries is that they are being dictated to. What they will do with their budgets, they are being dictated to. How they will repurpose their resources, they are being dictated to. How much they can borrow, how much they can spend, what they will need to spend on education, on structural development, they are being dictated to. And fundamentally, I will tell you that the moment you are able to weaponize war, weaponize poverty, two things happen. You diminish human intellect, you diminish the capacity of the mind to think beyond resources, and you continue to limit people to what they have in their soils or what other people, their neighbors have in their soils, because sometimes it's incursion from neighboring countries. It's incursion from people from neighboring contiguous countries who probably need resources in another country. Let's say header farmer clashes, headers from outside Nigeria who come into Nigeria to head their cows, and sometimes they stray into people's farms. Now, when you do not, Nigeria, for example, has not been able to meet the global standard for budgeting for education. Now, when you defund education by refusing to give people the right education, it means that the mental resources they need to compete favorably with their peers across the world will be diminished. Again, if you deny people of the intellectual capacity to think, what it means is that, every facet of human development, all the human development indices will be impacted. Therefore, as you defund education in Nigeria or elsewhere in the world, it means that this proverb comes into play. If you think that education is expensive, try ignorance. Now, those who tried ignorance have seen that banditry has risen because people who were not given education, people who were not given the right, human capacity to think, the agency to be creative, would rather take up arms than to take up their pen, for example, which is supposed to be mightier than the sword. So people are deploying violence instead of deploying their smarts, their intellect. People are resorting to the use of violence, the use of crooked means, of getting money. They sometimes kidnap farmers, traders, commuters. People who have access to good education will ordinarily rather use their intellection, will use their scholarship, will use their knowledge, their skills, and their expertise to make money, as against using the route of terrorism. So these things are connected. There's an interconnection. There's a marriage between the cross-border crimes, the movement of arms, the movement of resources, the movement of the foreign interference with all of this. So there is a linkage between all of these. So in essence, what you have is conflicts being conflated by poverty, by ignorance, by negligence of government, and and leadership deficit in leadership, among others. All of these things are working together to deny people of the agency for growth and development.
Thank you immensely, Shittu. Now, thank you for that elaborate response. Back to you, Prof. Like your co-panelist was stating, it's all about collective efforts. I think it's high time the world, most especially the African continent, stood up for itself in a bit to, quell some of these challenges that are facing the continent and to some extent the globe. Now, let's go a long way in scanning this time around the Middle East crisis, like we mentioned before. We saw last week where the International Criminal Court, the ICC, issued an arrest warrant against the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as well as the former defense minister. In a recent statement during an event in Portugal, we saw the UN chief, Antonio Guterres, that said the United Nations Security Council was outdated, citing that some of the resolutions that were taken did not match the present context or do not match present-day reality. With all this in mind, when you look at the United Nations, you look at the African Union and the international community, how do you believe that some of these entities, amidst all these dragging issues that are happening on the global stage, how can these entities protect vulnerable populations, which of course these institutions are normally called upon to protect? So how do they go about that if the United Nations chief, who is supposed to be the defender of this institution, says it's outdated and needs a reform?
Thank you again. Primarily, why was the United Nations created? That's a question you should be able to answer before you find out if it is meant for the protection of the world or for the protection of some particular individuals or, let's say, powers. You see, after World War II, because I would say the League of Nations was created after World War I, as a means to stop the warring Western tribes from fighting against one another. Let me tell you how it started. Let me go back a bit in the past. In during the scramble for Africa and the colonization of Africa, the one goal that motivated Europeans to enter into Africa after having enslaved our people to work, build their economies, when they came up with what they call the Industrial Revolution. Now they built machines. Machines could do what the humans they were picking from Africa to go do can do. And so as a result of that, they said, no, let's stop the whole thing and stop enslaving these people, because now we have machines that can do the work. But after the machines came, they needed raw material. And so where do you think they would tend to? They saw everything in Africa. Africa was a big market for them to sell their products, as well as Africa was where those raw materials were found. So they came up with strategy number 2, or let's say strategy number 3, colonization. Let's go and colonize these people. Let's go and tell them we are bringing them light. We want to come and civilize them. Civilize them? If you understand what civilization stands for and what development is, because development is supposed to always be contextualized. Development should not be based on what you think. You can't develop me based on your thoughts. I develop myself based on what I believe that development is supposed to be. So they came with their false ideas and decided to kind of brainwash Africans, not only brainwash, decided to create a, I don't know how I should put it. They built a system that will keep the African man in a state of loyalty at every given moment, even against his own will. So they came up with this idea. While they were doing that, they were getting the raw materials and going with to develop their nations with. In the midst of this, most other Western tribes in Africa started fighting among themselves within Africa. Then, that's when King Leopold had to call Bismarck, the Chancellor of Germany, to organize the so-called Berlin Conference. Some people think that Berlin Conference was a conference that was organized on how to discuss how to civilize Africa or to colonize Africa. No. It was a conference organized to solve the conflicts between Westerners. The Western tribes had a conflict which spread out right within the nations, in fact, within Africa. For example, in the Congos, the king of Belgium, King Leopold, believed that Congo was his property. And so as a result of that, nobody needs to take anything from there. So other nations who were coming in there, you cannot, if you are coming from another tribe, though from the West, for example, if you are a British person or a German, you come to Africa, no, you can't enter into Belgium. So that created a situation because they started fighting among themselves within the continent of Africa. So they said they don't want to disgrace themselves back here, so they need to solve this problem. So that conference was called forth to settle that conflict, not to bring civilization to Africa. And when they sat down, discussed, they said, okay, in order to solve this conflict, this is what we are going to do. We partition this continent. You, this is your part. You, this is your part. You, this is your part. You, this, so that you should not another person should not enter into another. That is when they started coming to say they are signing treaties. For those treaties were meant for one purpose, so that their flags can be hosted. The other nation, when you are coming, you say no. They are already there.
Yes.
So that was a strategy to solve their conflict, while they were creating a different conflict within the continent of Africa. So when that happened, after Bismarck and his turn passed, another German leader came up who thought maybe he needed to own the whole war. Yeah. So at the end of the day, the First World War came up. After that war, this guy said, this conference did not really solve our problem. We need to come up with something that can actually help stop these people, stop one another from creating more conflict within Africa. What did they do? They created the League of Nations. The League of Nations was a league of European nations, because I'll remind you, who were the leaders? Don't forget, Ethiopia as an African nation was independent and had never been colonized. Even though they joined the League of Nations, but they were not considered as a people that should have any power within the League of Nations. At the end of the day, even as a member of the League of Nations, they were not supposed to attack members of the League of Nations. Italy went to attack Ethiopia in the eyes of all this. The king of the Queen of England was there. She permitted, the Pope permitted. So all this makes you to understand the Africans were not in their program.
So it's just to say that these international institutions are not working
So
in the best interest of the vulnerable populations.
People call it international, but I think the best word to use is Western bodies. And so after the League of Nations could not succeed, because after that the Second World War still took place, that was still a war between European tribes. Africans only got involved because during that period, in 1935 to 1945, Europeans were here, colonized, they were the colonizers. So they had worked with our people, struggled to train some. So when the war started, they took some of our people and went there to fight for them. That war never took place here. It was not a war for Africa. Africans were not concerned. It was not a war. It was a European tribal war. They decided to say, okay, after this, let's do something. That was when Woodrow Wilson said, let me go back. The United States says, okay, you know what? We need to build back Europe. And for us to build Europe, you guys need to agree on one thing. We need to create a body. Before we put our money, what you call the World Bank, to develop Europe, you people need to agree. And then in this agreement, we need to create a security council that will shut anyone who is struggling to fight against. So they created the Security Council. In the Security Council, I want you to check very well. You have the United States, which is a Western nation.
True.
You have Britain, which is a Western nation. You have France, which is a Western nation. People might call it Eastern Europe, but Russia is still a European nation. So, where did China come from? In order to blindfold the world, let's take somebody from somewhere, at least from the East, and just put there so that you can see that we are trying to be balanced. Where is any African in that so-called permanent security council, whatsoever they call it? There is none. So when they did this, they now sat down and said, okay, Europe, this is money. That's France, that's US. This money, rebuild. You can get to this bank, we call it the World Bank. Take money from there to rebuild your nations. But once that happened, when Africans came, they are developed. Also, they gave them so-called independence, because that was the third phase of the strategy that they had developed. When they said they wanted to get their independence and they needed money from that same World Bank, the interest that Africans, that's levied on Africans, is different from the interest that is levied on Europeans. Why is it like that? And so, this is just to conclude by telling you that the so-called international bodies you are claiming, they are not international. They were created for a purpose, to reconstitute and reconstruct and take back power to give back to the West. And that is why the West remains on top. Russia, during those periods, were allies with the Westerners. Don't forget, that when Germany stood up, Russia stood with all the West to fight against Germany in the Second World War, when Adolf Hitler rose up and he wanted to conquer the whole world. Russia stood until they divided Germany into two, gave one portion to Russia, and the other part remained, what we call the Western and the Eastern, until they built a wall that divided the Eastern Europe, Eastern Germany and Western Germany. So this is to let you understand something. The so-called Security Council and permanent members, if you look at it very well, you realize it had nothing to do with the benefit of the world, but the benefit of Europe. And you calling it international bodies, they are not there to settle international problems. They are there to make sure Europe keeps on and remains in power. And that is why, if you think that they will favor you against their allies, you are wrong. Even if you are 100% right, you hear somebody who say, I veto it. And once there's one veto, even the other four have nothing to say.
Yes.
So this becomes a very tempting issue. You can't solve problems by creating problems. They solved the Western problem, created problems in different corners of the world. Just imagine in 1945, they decided to create Israel as a state in the midst of Palestine. That was a conflict that they knew very well. That was, you see what is happening today? It was calculated. Who are those Israelites? Those Israelites that you see, Israelites, if you want to check historically, the Israelites were not white. Netanyahu, those are Westerners. The so-called Jews who were found in Europe are the ones who were transported and placed there. Who were found in the US are the ones who were transported and put there. Is that Israel? That is not Israel. So when the war you see today happening there, it was calculated by the Westerners to destabilize the Middle East, so that the Middle East should not have, because if only Arabs were in that place, they have a strong force.
Actually.
But with the presence of the so-called created Israel, there is no power. That's why the United States can sponsor, in fact, the whole of Europe, the West, can sponsor Israel till tomorrow. When I see some Westerners, for example, when I saw The Hague actually sending out a warrant of arrest, I was shocked. Why? Because what pushed them? They are looking for ways to deceive the world.
Anyway, maybe, but that came out with a ceasefire that has just been agreed upon, that started today. We'll talk about the Middle East some other time. Let me now give the floor to you, Shittu. We believe you've waited a while. Apologies for that. Now, your co-panelists have cited a lot of points, and he said it's all about, you know, Africa consolidating itself, or better still, the world acknowledging that we have to be more than these institutions that have been put in place, but of course defending our values, defending what we stand for. Now, could some of the policies that are put on the African continent this time around, let's focus on Africa, say at the level of our respective institutions on the African continent, be it at a level of government or level of different countries, could the policies we put in force go a long way in preventing the emergence of conflicts within the continent of Africa?
Definitely, we must promote strategic non-alliance. Sometimes there are needless conflicts across the world for which Africa does not need to participate. It does not need to have a view or a perspective. At best, it could be a mediator, trying to see that the conflict does not escalate, but aligning with one party or the other should not be Africa's business. Again, in every conflict, Africa must always consider the human costs. Some of these Western nations have time on their hands. They've advanced technologically. and we are far behind, and therefore we will need to continue to invest in the resources that help to improve our human capital development. So when we begin to waste our times trying to be involved in their conflict or trying to side with, one side of, the conflicting parties, we remain behind the scene. We remain not strategic, because like my co-panelists did point out, you'll realize that in the key decision-making body, there's no Africa represented. So what is clear from the onset is that we are not thought of as strategic partners. Rather, we are only offered, slots to say, okay, let's make this thing look complete. Our voices are not heard, our concerns are not taken care of, and therefore we should think, in a more holistic manner and see how we can better understand ourselves. One of the reasons for conflict is sometimes when countries are not truly independent, because it's one thing for you to be independent on paper, it's another thing for you to demonstrate the fact that you are independent, in your spirit, in the way you do things as a nation, So we do not expect that quasi-regional bodies will just continue to dictate what the direction of, states, on the continent would be. So it is up to us beyond, speaking up in public fora, beyond making public statements, beyond resolutions, and pointing out what is wrong. We must go, to the grassroots and do the needful, so that we can build a society that does not rely on externalities for promoting what they need to do to survive as a nation.
Okay, just one last question, Shittu, before I get leave of you. Now, do you believe that intentionality could go a long way in addressing some of these issues or bringing about practical change on the African continent?
Definitely. I mean, if we were intentional about all of those things, we would have diversified the African economy. You realize that a lot of African nations are still mono economies. If you truly do not want conflict, you must stem the source of conflict, which is mostly poverty, and ignorance. So when you diversify the economy, you allow wealth to reach people whom it needs to reach. We must also invest truly in peace building initiatives and diplomacy, because again, you prepare for war at peacetime. You don't wait until there is crisis, there is war, and then you begin to think of how to figure out peace building initiatives. So these are some of the areas that I think that we must continue to promote collective responsibility, diversify the economy, as I did mention earlier, invest in peace building initiatives, and develop stringent policies that discourage armed conflict and interference by foreign nations, that have ulterior motives as they support war.
Thank you so much, Shittu. Now back to you, Prof. You listened to your co-panelists, and he cited points which aligns with what you had said earlier on. Now, when we look at the foreign policies Africa has with the rest of the world, I remember a couple of days ago, or better still last week, we saw the Kenyan president that had stated that it was imperative for not just his country, but Africa to have foreign policies that were people-oriented, that is, putting the people first before any entity that's coming to negotiate, or better still partner with the nation. I think that resonates with what Africa is fighting for in this age, especially as there is this rejuvenation across Africa, for Africa to resonate with change. We are fighting every day for Pan-Africanism to find its place on the African continent. With all these stakes, with everything involved, everything being equal, how can Africa orientate, like the Kenyan president was stating, its foreign policies, and of course put the best interest of its people first, so it doesn't get entangled in some of these global conflicts? That is, I think, the last question I'll be asking before I would say in a bit to chart the way forward.
Okay.
Yes, for the African continent.
Basically, most conflicts you see around the globe, and particularly in Africa, are economic based. Why do I say economic based? If you look at it, the reason why most of the conflicts you can name around the continent do exist, you realize that is based on poverty. It's poverty, which implies poverty has been weaponized and is being used as a weapon to humble the people, to keep the people in a beggarly position. And to be sincere, even the governments of our various nations are using poverty as a means to cause the people to be loyal. And that is terrible in itself, because I will say this: if I have to draw a policy on, for example, what they call this, their globalization, that's the fourth phase of what we started with, talking about the European tribal gathering. When they came up with, after they had developed their continent, they came up with globalization as a means to maintain Africa in a state. So when most African leaders want to think on, okay, we need to develop our nation, they say, but we are in a global market. So if I'm coming to your country, you need to give me a free chance. And what happened? The policy there that permits goods to enter into the country does not favor the people. Young entrepreneurs within a continent are not favored because the policy is being geared or being guided by the so-called globalization. You are creating a free market when you don't yet have what it takes to sell. There should be no free market favoring the West in Africa, because they have an established market for themselves. If Africa has to be able to get to that place where they can stand as equals, then they should be able to build their own market also. And you build by, first of all, being secluded. You build by having a policy that favors you internally, not by permitting people to come dump here in Africa. And once they come with their big money, the young entrepreneurs in Africa start suffering. So when that is not considered, you realize that it generates two grievances. And from there, it becomes an entire conflict. That's why I told you, most conflicts in Africa and around the globe are economically based. Because when they come, they want to get your resources. They give you arms to fight amongst yourselves. The person, if you win, we have this giant share because we gave you weapons to fight. If you become finally the president, they manipulate even the elections so that the person they want should be in power, so that they can manipulate the policies to favor their people than to favor the African leaders, African people. So at the end of the day, you realize that what the Kenyan president picked up, talking about policies that favor the people, that's policies that are people-oriented, that protect the citizens of the continent. It is something that I don't think he just said it. If I have to use a religious jargon, I would say it was revealed to him by God. Truth be told, if Africa needs to emerge, what the Chinese did, stayed quiet, close up themselves, send the people to learn. Because I will tell you, a consumer economy remains a beggarly economy. But a knowledge-based economy is a productive economy. And as a result of that, it brings development. And that is what the Chinese did. Today, they stand as a contending power with the West, and particularly the United States. So if Africa wants to actually emerge, we need to develop policies that favor the continent first, before we can now after we must have gotten to where we wanted to get to, because Africa is a sleeping giant. Let's build the continent first before we can open the doors. Talking about globalization, the continent will suffer till tomorrow. We will remain beggars while the Westerners live and reign in the continent.
Unless Africa takes action.
Unless Africa take action and take the right action.
And that time for action is definitely now.
No, it started. So if somebody is still sleeping, then that's their problem. Africa should rise. And the rising of this continent means taking over the globe.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, in just some, 1 minute, I would like you to answer the question, which is why we are here today.
Yes.
Who does this conflict benefit? In just 1 minute, please, before we can part
I am
ways.
sure I already answered that question.
Yes,
I will
you
tell
did.
you, those who engineer the conflicts around the world, as I said, they engineer it for economic reasons. And majority of those who engineer these conflicts around the globe, we have the West. I don't want to cite a particular nation. The Western nations are the ones benefiting from the conflicts around the globe, because most of the conflicts are engineered by them. I have showed you from when they came claiming they were from that time till now, they have been doing the same thing. So they are the ones engineering the various conflicts to benefit them and their people, not the global nation.
So you said it's time for action. Thank you so much, Professor AKUHMBOM, for your participation. Of course, your brilliant insight on today's edition of Talking Point.
It's my pleasure.
I equally acknowledge the participation of SHITTU FOWORA, who joined us all the way from Lagos. Ladies and gentlemen, like Professor AKUHMBOM re-echoed, it's time for action, and not just for Africa, but for the globe, if we want things to change. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're discussing our global conflicts. While asking the question, who does it benefit, we believe you learned a lot from today's conversation. I've been NJIX for presentation. Meanwhile, I'll say thank you immensely for taking out time to join us on these rendezvous and to stay in company of our numerous programs.